All music is essentially an art of ordering sounds. The chromatic scale consists of 12 pitches of sound. Mostly 7 out of the 12 are used in music. The root note, or your starting point, the third note, and the fifth note on the chromatic scale combine to form a major triad, which is the most basic form of a musical chord. By moving around the third and the fifth notes, different combinations render a multitude of triads and chords. Some sound happy, some sad, some creepy. Hence, emotion is produced out of combinations of simple sound frequencies. But before this becomes a class on music theory, let us bring our attention to the following. Notes, scales, intervals, meters are in fact the patterns that help us demystify the world of music. Not only is it extremely important to know the patterns of notes and when to play them, but also which notes are not meant to be played in a scale, because it is us who have identified over time that certain notes just do not sound well together. All genes are DNA molecules but possess potency to make proteins. One such protein, called the P protein, is responsible for the production of a natural pigment known as melanin, which is primarily responsible for making the hair, skin, and eyes appear darker. High concentration of melanin in the iris causes more light to be absorbed and less light to be reflected. More light absorption means the darker the color of the eyes will be. A little less concentration of melanin and the eye color departs from being the darkest browns towards hazel. Take a bit more of that melanin away and the eye color shifts towards the greens and then ultimately towards the blues. Let us observe the genetic code for brown eyes. Take a look at the genetic code for blue eyes now. You see, if a single one of those alphabets in the groups of 3 is mutated, the pigment would change. GCT, TAA, and so forth. These are the patterns we have identified and observed over time, which help us make sense of mutations, diseases, heredity, and a plethora of other things. Centuries ago, somewhere in Mesopotamia, a bunch of folks during their gazing at the stars and chill sessions saw 3 bright stars in a straight line. What they actually saw was a true personification of the sky, their supreme deity, the one who contains the whole universe. Anu, their supreme god. They called what they saw the heavenly shepherd of Anu. Also, centuries ago, in Egyptian antiquity, a bunch of fellows strolling around the pyramids or something, obviously, gazed at the stars and saw a constellation of 3 stars in a straight line. Upon closer inspection, it was obvious to them that what they were looking at was actually clearly the god Sah. That's how it's pronounced, I think. The 3 stars, along with their neighbors, unmistakably represented the god Sah. Arabs saw the 3 stars and the neighboring ones as a giant and called the constellation Al-Jabbar. Chinese saw it as a Shen, as one of their 28 lunar mansions. Hungarians saw a magic archer or Nimrod. Ancient Indians saw Nataraja, an avatar of Shiva, dancing in the same constellation. And in Tolkien's Middle-earth, it's known as the Swordsman of the Sky. And in one of the most memorable scenes from Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, the last words of a dying replicant go as,
"You people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion."
There is a pattern in how we build chords from notes. Patterns of genes dictate the color of our eyes. Patterns of stars combine to make constellations. Patterns. We see them everywhere. We see spirals and fractals, stripes, meanders, symmetries, waves, bubbles, cracks, spots, tessellations. So do we know patterns? Do we understand them? Most importantly, do we know the not patterns? Is there such a thing? Every time a pattern is not observed in nature, or we don't follow a pattern while performing an activity, it is in fact also a pattern. A rare event in space and time is hardly rare, as it may occur again 100 million years later and we would never find out about it. Every event is a part of a pattern on a long enough timeline. Let us observe the following sequence of alphabets. What do you think the next sequence of alphabets should be? A, B, F, I suppose you're thinking? Well, the next sequence in the pattern is actually 1, 2, 3. And how, you might ask? Well, because I have additional information. My exclusive information about the pattern suggests that every fourth sequence in the pattern must start a new sequence. So, every time a pattern is broken, that could actually serve as a reset point for a new pattern. One could only definitively know that until the next occurrence or lack thereof. Every instance of a pattern's reputation is only as reliable as its next occurrence. There are micro patterns and there are macro patterns. There are concentric patterns. There are patterns that combine to make larger patterns, and larger patterns break down to form smaller patterns. There are also patterns in comprehension, understanding, patterns in knowledge and recognition. There are patterns that can fill a floor in the form of tiles and never repeat. All information is actually contextualized data. When this data is organized in a meaningful manner, it is known as knowledge. When knowledge is interpreted in a subjective manner, it can be termed as understanding. When knowledge is applied in a timely fashion, that is to have knowledge of the events beyond their apparent scope, it is known as wisdom. And if applied wisdom is transformative in nature, then it most certainly leads to virtue. If observing a pattern can be described as information, telling it apart from other patterns has to be knowledge then. Discerning how all the patterns you have observed over time relate to each other and the consequences of their union or intersection, etc., must be wisdom. And how we eventually use that wisdom to transform ourselves is virtue, which is the ultimate goal of taking the path of knowledge. Empirical data, however, is context-based. Knowledge is restricted to that context as well. So is it correct to state that our wisdom also is bound to space and time? Imagine the lens through which a photograph is being taken. Everything that exists outside the frame only exists for someone who knows there is picture outside the frame. Imagine the frog in the well. Imagine Plato's cave analogy. If our patterns have any definitive meanings, it is required that we zoom out and ensure our understanding is correct. How else can we be certain that the next number in a series will follow the patterns or break it? To comprehend all the patterns, the order and the chaos, we need to look at the world from a lens that encompasses everything there has ever been, everything that there is and everything that there will be, beyond the confines of space and time, everything simultaneously. All of our data based on sensory perception only leads to knowledge which is limited, bounded, and slender, and if wisdom is to be extracted from this knowledge, then it will only yield insubstantial results, which really is not wisdom but merely contextual working understanding of variables. The age-old question, what is the purpose of my life, is not a question based on sensory data alone. It is an amalgamation of experiences, consciousness, awareness, lessons learned, the realization of our shortcomings and exploits and events. Thus, wisdom emerging out of such knowledge shall transcend particulars. It becomes general, it becomes applicable on things, situations, trials, cases, and patterns unknown. Half a picture then reveals the truth in the whole frame and beyond. The frog sees a bird fly over the well in the morning and the same bird returning in the evening with food in its beak. The frog does not exactly know where the bird gets the food from, but it knows there is something out there which provides food for the bird. And that is enough for it to know there is food available. Climbing out of the well becomes only a means. If this world is a manifestation of a will, a cause, all patterns then require keys, identification of traits which make patterns distinct. Patterns emerge out of historical data and can make predictions, help classify things, highlight outliers, make inferences, and reinforce existing ideas. All true knowledge, therefore, is inextricably bound with the knowledge of causes.